हेलो फ्रेंड्स। ये एक्सरसाइज नंबर सेकंड है एंडो की प्रैक्टिकल की, जहाँ पर हमने फर्स्ट एक्सरसाइज कवर की है पहले वीडियो में। ये पार्ट सेकंड है, तो स्टार्ट करते हैं। स्टडी ऑफ टेरेस्ट्रियल एंड पॉन्ड इकोसिस्टम ऑफ इंसेक्ट्स, ओइकोलॉजी कॉइंड बाय अर्नस्ट हैकल, ओइकोस सराउंडिंग होम लॉगर स्टडी। From this ecology is derived study of interrelationship within ecosystems. Ecosystem, the complex consisting of the organism and the physical environment. ओडम इकोसिस्टम की डेफिनेशन ओडम ने दी है 1971 में। डिफाइंड इन ब्रीफ इकोलॉजी a study of structure and function of nature. ओडम defined ecosystem as any unit that includes all the organisms, that is community, in a given area interesting with the physical environment so that a flow of energy leads to clarity. Define the trophic structure, biotic diversity and material cycles, for example exchange of between living and non-living parts within the system. Climate, physiography, and biotic communities interact freely to produce ultimately the ecosystem. Topography, geological materials, and climate are more concrete and determinable in indefinite, even quantitative terms. Communities, however, are more difficult to comprehend and present many challenging problems. The main objective of this exercise are: first, to make the specific field study of an ecosystem and to designate the biotic community, which reflects the controlling conditions, to study the relationship between the structure and the function of the ecosystem. यहाँ पर प्रोसीजर है. The material and equipment generally needed for the study of an ecosystem comprise aerial photographs and clinometer or Abney level field binoculars and maps, topographic and cover maps of the study area. Lemon in 1962. The collection of observations should aim at determining the following factors. First, community boundaries, designation of dominants, discrete boundary versus ecotone versus continuum. The community boundaries. Find an undisturbed area with reasonably constant topographic features. Record observations on the gross aspect of the vegetation. Note the main kinds of plants structurally or morphologically life forms which compose the general mass of cover. Record the species which appear to have the largest actual volume and those of lesser types that are common, and also those forming subordinate levels of layers of vegetation. Then view the landscape as a whole and study of the topography. Notice the abrupt break on change in landform. The difference in vegetation might be abrupt or gradual as the topography changes. Determine the conspicuous species that give the primary aspect to the adjoining community after passing beyond the topographic break. Secondary designation of dominants. The dominant species are those which control and give character to the community in temperate climates. There are typically a few dominants, possibly from one to few species. These species are supposed to have the greatest ecological effectiveness functionally. In practice, it is desirable to determine the dominance, and the community limits are drawn at the edge of the abundant stand of the dominant species. Measurement or estimates are made of the cover or volume, sometimes weight. Trees or sometimes animal dominants are easily used to express biomass or volume. Collect data in the original community visited and in one or two of the adjoining communities. In the case of the herbaceous or shrubby community, use the line intercept use the line intercept method. In the case of a forest, use random pass Use random pairs or the quadrant method while moving along the sampling strips. Make supplementary notes on the common subordinate plants present. Be particularly alert for noticing the evidence of animals in the community and make notes on their activities or effects. C. Discrete boundary versus ecotone versus continuum. For practical purposes, it seems necessary to divide two neighboring communities some fair, but it is not always easy. Sometimes the problem has to be solved by drawing boundaries which widely overlap. The students should discuss the problem, focusing their attention on the following aspects. What is the relation of the topographic features to the suddenness of changes in the community composition? Are there any sectors in the area examined where there is a wide diversity of opinion among various students? What is the apparent connection with topography, soil type, or other features in these areas or of difficult decision? How does the relative abundance of dominant organisms affect the problem of drawing a line between the adjoining communities? After returning from the field, discuss the problem of subjective versus objective approaches for determining the community boundaries. The class should attempt to reach a logical and practical viewpoint for resolving inconsistencies of a sharp boundary versus an ecotone versus a continuum. Relationship between the structure and the function of an ecosystem. Structure, as classified by Odom 1962. Structure means the composition of the biological community, including species, numbers, biomass, life history, and distribution in space of the populations. The quantity and distribution of the abiotic non living materials such as nutrients, water, etc. The range or gradient of conditions of existence such as temperate, light, etc. This subdivision of ecological structure falls into three categories. Although arbitrary is convenient for the study of both aquatic and terrestrial situations. Functions, for convenience of study, functions can also be placed in three subdivisions: the rate of biological energy flow through the ecosystem, that is the rate of production and respiration of populations in the community, the rate of material and nutrient cycling, that is the biogeochemical cycle. Third is the biological and ecological regulations, including both the regulation of organisms by environment, for example in photoperiodism, and the regulation of environment by organisms, for example nitrogen fixation by microorganisms. Both aquatic and terrestrial community types have several structural features in common. They must have the following three necessary biological components: producers or green plants capable of fixing light energy, that is autotrophs; animals and macro consumers which consume particular organic matter, that is phagotrophs; third heterotrophs. Both ecosystems must be supplied with the same vital materials such as nitrogen, phosphorus, trace minerals, etc. Both ecosystems are regulated and limited by the same conditions of existence such as light and temperature. The arrangement of biological units in vertical space is basically the same in the two contrasting types of ecosystems. Both have two strata, the autotrophic stratum above and autotrophic stratum below. The photosynthetic machinery is concentrated in the upper stratum or photic zone where light is available, whereas the consumer nutrient regenerating machinery is concentrated largely below the photic zone. Thus, the different ecosystems should be compared on a square meter basis, not on a cubic or volume basis. The aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems differ in and function in the following ways. Structure, species composition is completely different. The roles of producers, consumers, and decomposers are carried out by taxonomically different organisms be which have become adapted onto the environment through evolution. The trophic structure differs in that the land plants tend to be large in size but few in numbers, whereas the autotrophs of open water ecosystems, phyto, phytoplanktons, are small in size but are very numerous. In general, autotrophic biomass in such is much greater than the heterotrophic biomass on land, whereas the reverse is often true in the sea. The matrix or supporting framework of the community is largely physical in aquatic ecosystem, but more strongly biological on land. So the community itself is more important as a habitat on land than in water. Function. Let us now study as to how these similarities and differences in structure affect the ecological functions. The biological structure influences the pattern of energy flow, particularly the rate of net production and the relative importance of grazers and detritus consumers. How the total energy flow is less affected by structure and is less variable than the standing crop. Why the functional homeostasis has been evolved in nature despite the wide range in species structure and in biomass structure. Agroecosystem versus natural ecosystem. The agroecosystem differ from natural ecosystems in the following respects. They are of short duration, many times only 3 to 4 months, and sometimes a year or so, as against long duration of 50 years or more of the natural ecosystem. Unlike the natural ecosystem, they are discontinuous in both space and time and are very much influenced by variation in weather. The agroecosystems are artificial and are not self perpetuating like the natural ones. The vegetation is not naturally selected but often introduced through monocultures of limited genotype. The agroecosystems are less diverse and less stable than the natural ecosystems. The pest outbreaks are more common in agroecosystems. Impact of pesticides in agroecosystems. The following are some problems caused by pesticides in agroecosystem. Pesticide residues, insecticide resistance, insect resurgence, and secondary pest outbreak. Toxicity to non-target organisms. Pesticide residues. The pesticide that remains in the environment after application causes problems to humans and non target organisms already dealt in theory. Read. For example, residues of DDT, HCH in milk, vegetable above MRL, maximum residual limits, insecticide resistance. Insecticide resistance is the development of an ability to tolerate a dose of insecticide which would prove lethal kill to a majority of the individuals of the same species. This ability is due to the genetic change in pest population in response to pesticide application, insecticide resistance, and insect pest in India. Name of pest: Apis craxivora. Common name is aphid. Insecticides to which resistance: carbamates, OP, and cypermethrin. Bamesia tabaki, whitefly common name, endosulfan and monocrotophos. Helicoverpa armigera, cotton bollworm, OP synthetic pyrethroid bacillus. Plutella, xylostella, diamond black moth on cabbage, cauliflower, abamectin, BTOP compounds. Simple resistance. Insect develops resistance only against the insecticide to which it is exposed. Cross resistance: insect develops resistance not only to exposed insecticide but also to other related insecticides to which it is not exposed. As a practical problem, the student should make a study of the structure of terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems and discuss their functions on the basis of structure. Make a comparative study of the natural ecosystem, forest or a pond, and an agroecosystem, crop ecosystem, defining the producers, consumers, and decomposers. Study and compare the food chains in the various ecosystems, differentiating different trophic levels. Exercise number 3: studies on behavior of insects and orientation, repellency, stimulation, deterrency. Studies on behavior of insects. Animals have the ability to obtain information about their environment and respond to that information in an organized manner is called as insect behavior. Sensory reception. For obtaining information, the organs used as called sensilla, which incorporate sensory neurons which transmit the impulses from environment to brain resulted into active response. Each type of sensillum has evolved effectively to detect a specific type of energy or stimulus. Those are as follows: mechanoreceptor receives mechanical energy generated during touch, pressure, vibrations. Chemoreceptor detect the chemical energy of various molecules. Thermoreceptor detect the electromagnetic energy in the form of heat. Photoreceptors detect listed energy. Hygroreceptors detect moisture in the air. Basic response and pattern of behavior. Innate behavior: any basic response that can be performed spontaneously the first time in an appropriate situation itself is clearly unlearned and referred to as innate behavior. Often a number of inherited responses are combined into complex patterns of behavior that, although having an appearance of learned reaction or procedure, are not the result of prior experience. Learned behavior, on the other hand, the simple response may be modified by experience and thereby of learned behavior. Innate behavior: any innate instinct and inherited behavior consists of wide range of response are the most commonly classified as reflexes. This a simplest form of innate behavior is called as reflexes. The rapid involuntary withdrawal of your finger from a hot object is typical reaction of reflexes. A phasic reflexes or avoidance reaction. These are rapid, short-lived responses. For example, many insects respond to a stimulus by suddenly taking flight, a reflex known as avoidance reaction. Ionic reflexes. These are slow, long-lived responses. Kinesis. They are essentially random or undiverted locomotors reactions involving no orientation. Orthokinesis: the speed of locomotion directly dependent on the intensity of the stimulus, a simplest type of kinesis. Basically, a movement response to a stimulus. For example, an insect that is inactive in total darkness may start to stir when exposed to a low level of light intensity. Clinokinesis: aggregation of individuals that have simple entered a response of low level in stimulation and become inactive. This kind of orientation can assist insect in the location of a stimulus sources and prevent entrapment in a zone where unfavorable conditions prevails. Taxes are directional movement towards positive and away from negative, a source of stimulation. Clinotaxis orientation reactions to or away from a source of stimulation. Teleotaxis if an animal so stimulated goes to one of the sources instead of between them, as cranklet, cranklet and gun in 1961 suggest it would be serve little purpose for a bee visually orienting to flowers to pass between them. Orientation gender in 1963 or defined orientation as the capacity and activity of controlling location and attitude in space and time with the help of external and internal references, that is stimulus. Primary orientation, the maintenance of the position of the body. Secondary orientation, whereas directional responses to stimulus are secondary orientation. Transverse orientation result in an alignment of the body of fixed angle relative to the direction of the source of a stimulus, but they do not necessarily involve locomotion. The dorsal light reaction, in which locomotion is not usually involved, yet it is important as a means of maintaining primary orientation, by which free swimming of aquatic insects maintain their normal position. Light compass reaction, it is the most common form of transverse orientation involving locomotion, as the locomotion is frequently oriented at a fixed angle relative to a light source. Complex innate behavior, many behavioristic or recognize three kinds of external stimuli, each of which has a different effect. These are stimuli that arouse the individual, stimuli that elicit a response, and stimuli that tends orient an individual during its response. In some instances, different intensity of the stimulus may arouse, elicit a response, and orient an individual. Shore in 1964 found that when a low concentration of females sex attractant, it begins to move its antennae and vibrate its wings as usual. If a higher concentration of sex attractant is detected, the male moth takes flight elicitation, and then follows the concentration of ingredient to its source orientation. More commonly, however, a series of different external stimuli are involved in the completion of such complex patterns of behavior. Learning behavior. Learning has been variously defined, but almost any definition that implies some beneficial adaptive change in behavior as a result of experience is acceptable. Learning implies some storage and retrieval of information memory that has a subsequent effect on the animal's behavior. Not all behaviorists are in agreement as to how different kinds of behavior should be organized, and entomologists are not in full agreement as to kinds of learning displayed by insects. Allowing 1972, for example, identifies conditioning, instrumental learning, shock avoidance learning, olfactory conditioning. However, other behaviorists claim that insects also display habituation, reaction of mosquito larvae to shadows, latent learning, for example, orientation, flight, and homing amongst nest building hymenopteron. Single learning. Circumstantial evidence only for insect probably refined innate behavior. Imprinting. No good evidence of no good evidence of imprinting in insects. Associative learning. Some experimental evidence of insects' capability. For example, proboscis extension by blowflies. Instrumental learning. Learning by trial and error. For example, feeding studies with honeybees, behavioral periodicity, and clocks. Most insects, for example, display daily cycles of activity and quiescence. They may be active at most, they may be active at a night diurnal or during the transition periods of dawn and dusk called crepuscular. Exogenous rhythms response to periodic changes in the environment. Endogenous rhythms, they are hereditary endowments that manifest themselves even when external factors remains unchanged. Circadian rhythms, endogenous cycles with a periodicity close to 24 hours and are called circadian. Circannual rhythms with annual, circulunar rhythms with annual lunar, circapedal, even tidal periodicities. Biological clock, the apparent innate ability of organisms to measure the passage of time has led to the use of the term biological clock or insect clock. Functional aspects of behavior. Displacement, it means any change of location. Migration, causes of migration. Migration is simply an immediate behavioral response to the environmental condition that exists due to crowding or some deterioration in the quality or quantity of their food supply. However, many species of insects seems to migrate as a matter of course, even though they are not crowded, and their habitat appears to the suitable for continued utilization. Classes of migration. Class 1, species with a lifespan limited to single season leave their breeding site, disperse to new areas to reproduce, and die soon thereafter. Class 2, species with relatively short-lived adults that leaves their breeding site of travel to a new location. Class 3, relatively long-lived individuals leave their breeding site, travel to a winter or summer resting site where they pass through a reproductive diapause. Classes of migration. Insects, like most organisms, derive both genetic and ecological benefits from being able to move from one place to another. Such behavior increases the mixing of gene pool and hastens the spread of beneficial mutations biologically. Migration enables the species to vacate crowded areas or habitats where the requisites for life are deteriorating. Orientation, the addition to migratory movement of insects move around move around a great deal with within what can be called their home or action range. Migration are characterized by the strengthening of the individuals attached, resulting from a separation of its responsiveness to appetitive stimuli. The travel movement, on the other hand, is characterized by frequent response to appetitive stimuli. However, both travel and migratory movement require some degree of orientation and some ability to navigate. Exercise number 4. सो एक्सरसाइज नंबर 4 हम नेक्स्ट वीडियो में देखेंगे. थैंक यू सो मच फॉर वॉचिंग. लाइक शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब.